This is a story that occurs in and around central Italy, Umbria to be exact, which was once a papal state, and mainly in Assisi. There are places on our earth that seem to have fostered or support contemporary theories of our cosmos, such as the parallel universe described by physicists in string theory. One such prominent place is Assisi. It seems apparent that in Assisi, our plane of existence intersects with some other plane, or at least comes close enough to allow us to sense its existence, and maybe even cross over. This sense of something other than ourselves was defined early in human history as a spiritual energy, the presence of God. If not for this intersection, the original builders of the little chapel which later came to be called St. Mary of the Angels would not have felt compelled to construct the tiny stone structure in the middle of a then forested wilderness, well away from populated areas. It also seems that at another chapel, which became known as San Damiano, the founders recognized a nexus of energy and determined, despite practical limitations, that an earthly presence was needed to mark the spiritual presence. It is here that we begin, with a young man named Francesco, searching for his identity and his place in the world. Francesco di Bernardone was not unlike his contemporaries, a son of the rising merchant class, a boy with romantic dreams of becoming a knight, a young man reveling in periods of great self-indulgence, and then tormented by great self-doubt. Francis was not so different from any of us. We all struggle to find our place in the world, and we all experience self-doubt, anxiety, and even despair. About 1205, Francis, who had been undergoing several years of personal introspection and change, once again sought refuge and solace at an ancient subterranean grotto beneath the dilapidated chapel. Having seen the realities of warfare, his dreams of glory as a knight were erased, and his struggle to find his self-identity brought him into bitter conflict with his father's expectations. Literally hiding to escape his father's fury, Francis was reflecting on his situation. It is said, meditating in prayer, when the nexus opened. At that moment, Francis, touched by grace, understood he had received a command from God through the crucifix. The image of Christ called him by name. Francis, go and repair my house, for as you can see, it is in ruins. At first, Francis comprehended only the literal meaning of this message, and immediately set upon rebuilding the decrepit structure. This only brought him into further conflict with his father, as he removed the most precious fabrics from his father's business, which he sold along with his horse and all his personal belongings to finance the reconstruction. But Francis soon realized that no good could come from this scandal, so the money was returned. His enraged father, hoping to shame Francis into submission, brought him before the bishop on legal charges. Surprising everyone, Francis renounced his earthly father, and stripping naked, returned all that he possessed, proclaiming that he had now but one Father, who art in heaven. The bishop jumped to his feet and covered Francis with his cloak, thus accepting him as a penitent and becoming his protector. Sometime between 1207 and 1212, two events for which Francis is most remembered were recorded. While traveling through the Spoleto Valley, Francis came upon a place near Bavagne filled with an enormous number of birds. As he approached, they did not fly off, but they remained to hear Francis praise the Creator, and remained still until he gave them permission to fly. Outside Gubbio, the story is told of Francis negotiating a truce with a wolf that was terrorizing the town. The agreement called for the town to set out food for the wolf, and in return, the wolf would agree to leave the town in peace. It is important to note that the accounts of these stories in the Legende were probably more to offer a lesson than to document ordinary human events. In the first case, the Legenda recounts Francis' reverence for all creation, that the knowledge, power, and goodness of the Creator was present in all creatures and things. The Legenda of the wolf is again exemplary of Francis' respect for creation, and as all creatures share the goodness of God, we all share the responsibility to walk the path of peace. The wolf can also be taken to represent desire and temptation, a beast which may not be tamed, but one with which a truce can be forged. The origins of the little chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary at the Porziuncola are uncertain, though it is known to have existed as early as the 4th century. Though Francis believed one can receive grace anywhere in the kingdom of God, he recognized, as had the original builders, that here was a place so filled with divine grace that angelic spirits were often encountered. For this reason, the chapel became known as St. Mary of the Angels. After Francis restored the abandoned structure with his followers, the abbot of the Benedictine monastery of Mount Subasio gifted Francis with possession of the Porziuncola around 1209. But Francis' passion for absolute poverty prevented the brothers from accepting ownership. Instead, they insisted on paying a symbolic yearly rent in the form of a basket of fish. Francis would often say that God had revealed to him that of all the churches dedicated to the Blessed Virgin, Mary loved the Porziuncola the most. Francis would spend a great deal of time in prayer and meditation in the little chapel. The legenda recounts that on one occasion, Francis, through the intercession of the Virgin Mary, pleaded for the forgiveness of all humankind's sins. A great splendor of roses descended from heaven, as evidence that his request had been granted. Today, this event is celebrated on August 2nd, as multitudes of the repentant come to be granted complete remission of their sins. Francis spoke of himself as the greatest of sinners, and that his body was his worst enemy. The legenda recounts of many of his clashes with temptation, of the spirit and of the flesh. Learning that he could not overcome temptation through discipline alone, he often afflicted his body with mortification. During one struggle, he was so filled with anguish at being tormented by lust that he removed his robe and threw himself into a thicket of wild roses. It is said that from that day forward, the roses of the Porziuncola grow without thorns. The mystic roses, as they have come to be known, are the only wild roses known to grow without thorns, a sign that the Creator has taken human weakness into consideration. On a journey from Spoleto into Romagna, about 1213, Francis encountered a gathering of noblemen from many countries. With great devotion, Francis mounted a low wall and began to preach. Among the group was Count Orlando di Chiusi, who was deeply affected by the sermon. Afterward, he spoke at length with Francis, and in the end, offered him the mountain of Laverna, that was among his titled lands, as a fitting place for one who desires to lead a solitary life and to do penance for his sins. Laverna is a mountain of great chasms, fissures, and openings in solid rock. On his final retreat to the mountain, according to his own words, it was revealed to Francis that the torn rocks were the will of God, miraculously created at the exact hour of the Passion of Christ. When Francis received this revelation, he isolated himself to a secret and solitary place to prepare himself for the mystery that was yet to be revealed to him. The Passion of Christ was to be renewed in the soul of Francis and in his body. 2 years before he departed his earthly existence, around September 14, 1224, Francis was immersed in devout contemplation when he again experienced the operation of grace. Christ, in the apparition of an angelic seraph, appeared to Francis. After a long and secret conference, the vision disappeared, leaving Francis with the stigmata, the wounds of the crucified Christ. His hands and feet seemed to be pierced by nails, which appeared to remain in the flesh. Francis did all he could to conceal these wounds, but his cloak was always stained with blood, and he could barely stand. Rumors began passing among the brothers, and in a short time, news of the stigmata spread widely. Although the truth was revealed to the friars, only after his death were the wounds seen and verified. Saint Bonaventura described them exactly in form and substance, and those that witnessed the wounds stated that rather than arousing horror, they bestowed a great dignity and beauty. From that point forward, Laverna has been considered a sacred place. Within the Rieti Valley is another mountain retreat where Francis went for solitude. The friary at Greccio consisted of little more than a few natural caves hewn from a projecting rock face. Francis would continuously recall and contemplate the words of the gospel and the works of Christ. As he desired to live the example of Jesus to perfection, he felt it was necessary to restore the memory of the birth of the Christ child in Bethlehem. He obtained permission from the Pope for a dramatic plan. He had a manger prepared and an ox and an ass brought to the friary. The brothers were called from various places, and on Christmas Eve, 1223, the people of the town came in crowds, bearing candles and torches, and Greccio was transformed into Bethlehem. Francis preached about the birth of the poor king, and the legenda recounts that many present saw a vision of a child come to life in Francis' arms. The mystery of the Incarnation was renewed, and the practice of the Christmas creche, begun that night, continues to bring great joy and to rouse the hearts even of those weak in faith. The self-imposed hardships of Francis' life irreversibly weakened his health. During the last 2 years of his life, Brother Elias forced Francis to accept treatment for his illnesses and sent him for convalescence in restorative places. Although he showed strong spirit, Francis became increasingly weaker and sicker. It is said that at the end he was nothing more than skin and bones and totally blind. During his last days, he was a guest at the house of the Bishop of Assisi, but he begged the brothers to bring him to the Porziuncola, because he wanted to render his soul unto God in the place where he said he had first gained perfect knowledge of the way of the truth. In the 20th year of his conversion, in the 2nd year after the impression of the stigmata, and in the 45th year after his birth, Francis died on October 3rd, 1226. 2 years after his transitus, Francis was proclaimed a saint on the 16th of July. The next day, Pope Gregory II and Brother Elias, Vicar General of the Friars Minor, laid the foundation stone for the future resting place of the saint. The original complex was completed in just over 100 years, and today is considerably different from the original plan. The basilica enshrines the tomb of St. Francis and unique art treasures by Cimabue, Giotto, Lorenzetti, Martini, and others. Because of the frescoes depicting the saint's life, the basilica is an embodiment of the message of St. Francis. The tomb makes it a place for spiritual pilgrimage, and as it houses the most complete examples of 13th and 14th century art, and no doubt some of the most important frescoes in Europe, it has become a school of art. The complex consists of 2 separate churches, one built atop the other. The lower church is actually a giant crypt, cut into the living rock of the mountain. Steeped in semi-darkness, it is used for veneration of the saint who is buried under the altar. The upper church has the appearance of a large Gothic hall and is illuminated by the first set of stained glass windows in Italy. The marble throne in the apse is a reminder that it was originally intended to serve as a papal chapel. The 28 panels in the nave devoted to the life of Francis are particularly significant, as this was the first time an attempt was made to narrate the complete story of a saint's life. As one exits the church, the most celebrated painting of the cycle, Francis preaching to the birds, would have been the last impression a congregation would be left with. A message of peace, humility, and joy. An example to continue Christ's mission on earth. 700 years later, these messages still linger in our minds.